Her supposed best friend had introduced her to this new girl simply as a friend and not a best friend. And she explained to me that the reason she was mad was because every time they had met friends of hers, she would introduce this other person as her best friend. And she felt it would just be natural for this other person to introduce her to her own friends as her best friend and not just a friend. Just because you think of someone as your best friend doesn't necessarily mean they think of you the same. To you, they might be your best friend, but to them, you might be just a friend. So, every so often, we have married couples renewing their marital vows. These people get back to a church or a house of worship, and before God and man, friends and family, to tell each other, I love you, just like I did when we got married, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I was thinking about this, and it dawned on me that this is just a wonderful idea, because nothing is constant. People are always changing, and life circumstances are always changing. And so, coming back to the pulpit to say, despite all the changes around, despite all the external changes, what I felt for you in my heart has stayed the same, and I'm willing to keep going. Two people telling each other the same thing in a renewal of their marriage, in a renewal of their marital vows, is just a wonderful idea, because they remind each other of what their destination is, or what their hope and their expectations of the future are. So I was thinking about this, and it dawned on me that a lot of friendships will do a lot better if folks just took the time out to constantly reevaluate their relationships and to have renewal of vows, not necessarily going to the church or to the pulpit now, but to know on what grounds, where exactly your relationship, your friendship with this or that person really stands. Because what's friendship, by the way, or just any relationship? A relationship, in this case a friendship, is two or more people together on a common boat, on a common ship. And what that means is these are people seeing life from a relatively common perspective and having similar aspirations and expectations of life. And so they understand each other better because they're compatible. And because of that, they can easily help each other move towards their common goal. That's the whole meaning behind the idea of a friendship or a relationship. People on a common ship, people with a common dream and a similar destination in their minds. Now, The mistake that happens in most relationships and in most friendships for that matter is that while circumstances change and people change, which of course is a constant of life, nothing wrong with that, some people fail to constantly reevaluate their relationships with their friends, leading to all sorts of disappointments and shock and issues and all that. Whereas if you would simply do a constant reevaluation of your relationship, then you would understand that just as change is a constant of life, your relationship status with one another in itself is evolving. And just because someone was your best friend 20 years ago, 15, 10 years ago, doesn't necessarily mean they are your best friends right now. No. Get to think of it. When you both first met 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you were both Christians. But now one person believes in God and the other person believes in a tree. You had same political views, but right now one person is a Democrat and the other believes the world is run by reptilians. You both probably had a common approach to social life. But right now, one person is a heavy drinker, while the other doesn't drink at all. And all those changes are absolutely normal because change is the only constant thing in life. But what is not normal is you not constantly reevaluating your relationships. Because what reevaluating your relationships on a constant basis does is it lets you redefine the friendship statuses of those around you and permit you to reciprocate with just the right amount of energy befitting each and every one on the spectrum of friendship. And what that means is that you turn to pour in different amounts of yourself into the relationships around you based on their respective statuses. The energy you pour in, the part of yourself you pour in into a relationship that is held together by nothing but pure, innocent love is different from the energy you pour into a relationship that is held together by benefits, for example. And relationships most of times go through this metamorphosis. At some point in time, you might find two people are held together by love, and a few years down the line, what keeps them together is nothing but kids. Or maybe the fact that they work in a common company. You take away the company and there is no friendship. And so there is nothing wrong with all the changes and all the metamorphoses. But your responsibility, your homework is to be able to identify and know exactly where each and every of your relationships stand so that you can pour adequate amounts of yourself, of your energy into your various relationships. And so the question therefore becomes, how does one go about these habitual re-evaluations of relationships and friendships? For which the answer is simple. It's by paying attention. Quite simply paying attention, because people are always communicating. You're just not paying enough attention. You want to pay attention to the words that people say, and you want to be observant, and you want to pay attention to details of the things they do. And sometimes, if necessary, you want to ask the right questions. A good example of friendship reevaluation, I believe a lot of people can relate to, will be from the Bible and will be of Christ having a conversation with his apostles. So you have this part in the Bible, I think it's not the Gospels, I'm not too sure, but it is somewhere there, where Christ is having a conversation with his homies, with the 12 apostles, and they're giving him feedback of what the society thinks of him, what opinions they hold of him. And they say things like, well, people say you might be a reincarnation of John the Baptist. You might be John the Baptist who has come back, or just a great prophet, or one of the great teachers of old who was reincarnated and all that. And they go on and on and on and all this blah, blah, blah. Until at some point in time, the master stops them. He goes, all right, I get that. But how about you guys? What do you guys think I am? Who do you say I am? And 11 of the 12 apostles were quiet. They had no idea who Christ was. Just one of the apostles, Peter, would raise up his hand and say, I know who you are. You are the Son of God. You are the Christ, the Son of God. And you know how the story ends. Jesus goes on to say, well, because you know me and everything, you're the rock, and upon this rock I'll be in my church and all that. I think you know the story. But the point is, you see the master asking questions. And based on the replies, he's able to decipher exactly where the 12 class on the spectrum of friendship. And to prove the strength of how much Christ learned from Peter's answer, you would see Peter, you would see the same Peter, the only man amongst the 12 who actually knew who Christ was. You would see him a couple months later, when Christ is about to face his demise, pull out a dagger and put up a little fight for Christ, while all the rest were nowhere to be seen. But Peter would be there for Christ. If you would only ask the right questions and get to position people exactly where they're supposed to be and act with them just as much as they deserve, then you would be able to know who will be ready to pull out a dagger and put up a fight for you. That's one. Asking questions. Being observant, listening to the words that come out of people's mouths. One time I had a counseling session with a little girl who was extremely disturbed. And the course of her state of mind, she explained, was that she was walking the previous day with her best friend. And what had happened was that they had met this other girl on the way who was supposedly a friend to her best friend. And her expectation was that her best friend would introduce her to this new girl as her best friend. But no, that's not what happened. Her supposed best friend had introduced her to this new girl simply as a friend and not a best friend. And she explained to me that the reason she was mad was because every time they had met friends of hers, she would introduce this other person as her best friend. And she felt it would just be natural for this other person to introduce her to her own friends as her best friend and not just a friend. And that was a little bit of a hard one to make a little kid understand. But the bottom line was, at the end of the day, I had convinced her to understand that you do not get to choose how people classify you in life. It's only up to you to choose where you classify others, but not the reverse, not vice versa. And so, by that logic, just because you think of someone as your best friend doesn't necessarily mean they think of you the same. To you, they might be your best friend, but to them, you might be just a friend. And so, by that logic, just because you think of someone as your best friend doesn't necessarily mean they think of you the same. To you, they might be your best friend, but to them, you might be just a friend. And so you want to always have at least a near accurate understanding of where exactly people fit in your life. Because failure to understand this risks the emergence of a Judas at any point in time. History has no shortage of people, of great men who got betrayed by their so-called best friends. You don't want to be that. Constantly reevaluate your friendships and know who to dine with and who not to.